Let's get started. A couple things before we get started. One is some of you probably know that this is Economic Development Week. The borough kicked off the Economic Development Week with a little function last night at Roy Thompson, and nice little event. We are having an open house from 4:30 to 6:30, from 4:30 to 6 on Wednesday the 9th. And we'll just, for those of you that don't know what we do, that's what we do, but we'll have on display here what all we work on, the different projects we work on. We'll have some refreshments and kind of have a rolling dialogue going on the TV monitor there. So hope to see you all and enjoy, if you can, Economic Development Week. And then before we get into Jimmy's presentation, I'd like to tell all of you that we have been asked, the FEDC has been asked by the borough to head up a air quality work group. It's gonna start in June, go through at least October, maybe November, but the idea is to bring in community stakeholders, interested groups and individuals to try to come up with a solution that the community is willing to accept and buy into and move forward with. I've told those of you who bothered to listen to me several times that air quality is a cornerstone of the success of this community. I'm a strong believer and a strong supporter of cleaning up our air. And while it's not directly economic development, it is directly connected to our economic livelihood. So with that, those editorials, I will introduce Jimmy Fox. Jimmy says he's worked with people of all walks of life and positions of authority to make progress on complex and controversial issues in communities, states, and nations. He's a member of the National Faculty for Management Assistance team and works for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Jimmy has received his degree in wildlife management from Southeast Missouri University. So Jimmy, the floor is yours.
Thank you all for coming this morning. A little background germane to the topic. I grew up in the Ozarks of Missouri. Me and my dad and brothers split and chopped wood all summer long, so we could always have dry firewood. That's what we used for heat our home. My family still lives back there. I'm here, but they're back there. Oldest brother and my dad both use outdoor hydronic heaters to heat their home, heat their water, but different location, rural area in the Ozarks. But I'm familiar with burning wood. I burn wood myself. I have a cabin. I have a fireplace and home here in town. So I want to say that I'm not an expert on this issue by any means, and there are people here in this room that probably know a lot more about me on some of these particular aspects, but I'm interested and I want to help solve the problem, so that's why I'm standing up here. I don't claim to be an expert. So what I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of context on this ballot initiative that you'll see coming up here in October. And really the question of whether or not we're going to hand over control of the air pollution issue to the state and federal government. A little bit of the legal foundation real quick. This just kind of like gives you how the borough can be involved in regulating air pollution. So Title 21, the Borough Code, established the Air Quality Control Program, and the PM 2.5 program was established in 2010. I'm not a doctor, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of understand what's going on. So PM 2.5, that PM is an acronym for particulate matter. Particulate matter 2.5 micrometers. The stuff that's out in the air isn't exactly 2.5. It's bigger, it's smaller, but that's the number that health profession chose. Basically, at that size or smaller, the particle can enter the bloodstream. So that's why that number 2.5. But you can see here human hair on the left, and the little pink particle here emulate 2.5, PM2.5, and you can see that you can stack a number of them across the width of human hair. So you inhale PM2.5, comes into the lungs, gets in your bloodstream. Anywhere your blood goes, you can have PM2.5. So placenta, brain, heart, lungs, it can go anywhere. And because it does, you can see the cascade of effects that can come with PM2.5 pollution. You can, depending on who you are, you can, escalate up this pyramid rather quickly, or you may be one of the lucky few that, can suffer long-term exposure and not have a lot of health impacts. But the science is evolving rapidly. So I think it's really useful in this conversation to kind of go back in history and realize that Fairbanks folks and North Pole folks are not the first to struggle with smoke. And the earliest that we've been able to find, researchers, historians have found someone that's talked about air pollution was in the year 61. So next few slides, I just want to take you through what we've learned, how we've experienced air pollution as a species. So you've got 1273, English Parliament bans burning the soft coal. 1464, Cologne, Germany. You've got a smelter owner that's smoking out the town, and folks say, hey, we need to put a stop to this. They do that. 1775 was the first, not only really a medical doctor, but a guy that was interested in human health. These chimney sweeps in England kept developing testicular cancer. This chimney sweeps, and so he documented that these chimney sweeps, from 10-year-old chimney sweeps to older chimney sweeps, they would develop testicular cancer. So that was the first documentation of cancer that maybe was attributed to coal smoke. And are we okay? Yeah? Okay? Okay. So fast forward to 1864, this is where we start seeing some, this problem kind of shows up in the courts. 1864, Mr. Keith directs his chimney over the fence, aimed at Mr. Whalen. And anyway, it goes all the way to the state of Missouri Supreme Court, and they find it, of course, in the plaintiff's defense there. So 1880s, Industrial Revolution. Now major U.S. cities began to pass these smoke curtailment rules. 1892, about 1,000 people die in London because of this smog that was socked in over the city. 1898, Andrew Carnegie tells the Chamber of Commerce smoke is causing people to leave. We've heard that before. And that the man who abolishes this smoke nuisance will earn our deepest gratitude. Well, there wasn't a man that actually made progress on it. It was the city of Pittsburgh. And they established some ordinances and emissions. They were documenting decrease in emissions because of those curtailment rules and smoke inspectors. 1915, the U.S. Supreme Court rules in the case, limits may be placed on air pollution. In 1921, we see kind of the first publication. This doctor out of Washington University Medical School talks about the effect of smoke on health. And now we're seeing 23 National Smoke Prevention Associations formed. Then the federal government establishes Public Health Service. They begin monitoring air quality. You're seeing the trend here. 1948, Donora, Pennsylvania. Anyone heard about the catastrophe there in Donora? So about 28 people died over the course of a week from an inversion. They had a lot of industrial air pollution, and there were a lot of people that were sick and people that died later. So that's documented, and the federal government actually studied that and produced an epidemiological study that said, yep, this injury was caused by the smoke. And in 1949, air pollution's documented in Fairbanks. And then 50s, 60s, and 70s, we start seeing the federal government, the Congress passing laws, and there's a number of amendments to the Clean Air Act through the 70s and more recently. So now we're going to kind of start focusing on Fairbanks. Again, just kind of give you context on this question before us. So in the 70s and 80s, many of you are well aware of the carbon monoxide program the borough administered, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. 2006, we were notified by the EPA that we were not meeting the Clean Air Act standard. So 35 micrograms per cubic meter square of PM 2.5 in a 24-hour period, or a 3-year average. And I can talk more about that, and then I'd start getting outside of my expertise. So that's the standard. We were out of attainment. We were notified in 2006. 2009, the state publishes a study that says when the pollution, the PM 2.5, increases in Fairbanks, hospital visits increase. I'm sorry? Alaska Department of Health and Social Services.
Thank you.
Sorry. So, and then also that year, we're officially notified we're in non-attainment. We got 10 years to clean up to reach attainment. That year, City of Fairbanks bans new hydronic heaters without a permit. And the voters here say yes to a curtailment program for the borough. It's 2009. 2010, the same department that did the study at the hospital refused to study a spike in reported illnesses and absences at Wood River Elementary School. And we'll talk a little bit more about Wood River here in a minute. So now 2010 and 11, voters say no to the curtailment program. So we began a stove changeout program, education program. This is starting to sound familiar to all of you, I'm sure. 2012, voters reaffirmed no curtailment program. So there's 3 votes, no. The legislature gets involved and approves $30 million in tax credits for LNG storage in Fairbanks. 2013, the Assembly defeats an ordinance to provide heating oil subsidy to a couple hotspot neighborhoods. So trying to encourage people to not burn wood. Please just keep burning heating oil during these episodes where we're going to have a lot of pollution. The Assembly defeated that ordinance. The Assembly in that same year did establish special change-out incentives for another couple hot spots, but there's very little to no participation in that program. And then we've got the legislature, of course, putting their back into the natural gas program. So again, the Assembly, we don't have local control, so the Assembly establishes a voluntary notification system. Hey, the air quality is bad, please refrain. That was kind of the message. The Assembly dedicates more money to a public information campaign. And then in 2014, the voters, now we're going back to say, yeah, we do want to have a local control program. So then, January, I think a sponsor of that ordinance sitting here, that was ordinance 2015-01. Establishes a local control program, and then also DEC establishes their regulations on PM 2.5. And folks remember IGU begins construction in North Pole, 2015. That question comes before the voters again. We say yes again. And then 2016, 17, you see the Assembly starting to make some adjustments. Some people say moving the goalposts, but it's tweaking. It's tweaking that control program. And then 2017, our area is now in serious non-attainment for failure to meet the goal. And then IGU, you know about what happened here last fall with IGU. And then the current reality, recently the Assembly recommended that be further testing of a electrostatic precipitator device to reduce emissions with Dr. Olson here pioneered over in North Pole. And then we have, for the 7th time in 10 years, this fall, the question on the ballot, will we have a local control program or not? And of course, 2019 is the 10-year deadline for meeting the goal of less than 35 micrograms per cubic meter for 24-hour period. So this is kind of the summation, executive summary of the ballot proposition. It's pretty familiar, should be familiar to you. It's basically the borough would not regulate, prohibit, curtail, bar, nor issue fines or fees associated with the sale, distribution, installation, or operation of a solid fuel burning appliance or any type of combustible fuels, except for interior gas utility. And then they had some points to make their case, saying that the concern for air quality is subordinate to the need for warmth. Cost of liquid fuels forces residents to seek renewable and affordable natural resources. They claim that the state and federal standards for air quality are in place, and that air quality improvement can be attained through community education and incentives to upgrade or repair existing home heating devices. So this is the million-dollar question. What happens if majority vote yes on that proposition? And I don't have a monopoly on the truth here, but I've talked to a lot of folks, and I'll give you some things to think about. So if we lose local control, we go, so let's say Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation takes charge. We know that they do not issue fines. They basically, this is what they do. They'll take in a complaint. They do have a few staff here in Fairbanks. That staff may investigate the complaint. They may follow up with a phone call. There may be a warning letter. They may issue a nuisance abatement order. It's basically your official, please stop. And if that fails, they may summon you to court. And this isn't a perfect loop. Sometimes we'll talk about that, but it doesn't always just flow exactly like that. Rulemaking, so like tweaking a rule that's in place or establishing a new rule, with the state, it's going to take longer than the assembly. So it takes on average 9 months to establish a state regulation. And the rulemakers aren't your neighbor next door, they live in Juneau. And I would assume if under state control, we would go back to the way we've been in the past, where we'd be focused on this wood stove change-out program and education program. And I would assume that DEC would continue to operate the air quality monitoring system, which they do currently. So here's a little bit of background on DEC administration of a program. The Wood River case I mentioned earlier. Strons had the hydronic heaters there near the school, and here's the kind of the timeline, brief timeline of what happened there. So beginning in 2008 through 2013, there were 187 complaints received by the state against these hydronic heaters. The source of those complaints were verified 61 times. So in 2009, there were calls and letters to the Strons from DEC. 2010, radio silence. 2011, calls, letters, and nuisance abatement order letter, and then a meeting, some attorneys and stuff. 2012, nobody's answering the phone. And then 2013, January, spring of 2013, they're in court, and the hydronic heaters are no longer smoking. Another case here, we have a unlisted hydronic heater over on College Road. It's supplying heat for an apartment complex, an old apartment complex, I think built in the 70s, I believe. Beginning in 2008, the state receiving complaints. They've received complaints through 2017. They sent warning letters to the owner 2011, 2013, 2017. This is an excerpt from the letter, saying we've received additional complaints. We will investigate, consider taking further actions, which may include. Please contact us. So that was the trend, and then in 2017, because of the local control program, the owner of this device had to apply for no other alternative source of heat application, because that was the only source of heat for that building was that coal-fired hydronic heater, unlisted coal-fired hydronic heater. That variance request was denied by the Air Pollution Control Commission, which is 7 citizens like yourselves that serve on the commission for free. So these are neighbors. I attended that meeting in April. A few other people here were there. And then also just another look at kind of the local control here is that in March 2018, the commission heard a similar variance request and actually granted the request for 3 unlisted hydronic heaters over near North Pole. So we hope this never happens, but it's possible, so I'll just touch on it real briefly. We could see federal control. Basically, if we fail to meet attainment and we get into sanctions, and basically the state fails to meet attainment, we could see federal control, which they do have citation authority, so they can issue fines, but their sanctions are the things that I think everybody's most concerned about, and they tend to try to deal with industry, not individuals. Rulemaking, so if you want to tweak a rule, with EPA, it's not going to take a month. It's going to take you probably closer to 2 years. And you're not going to have coffee with the EPA regulators unless you're in and out of Reagan, Washington on a regular basis. So I contend that local control is relatable. It's folks that are making the rules that live in the community. They probably burn with wood too. It's responsible. I mean, it would be irresponsible to not try to solve the problem, I think. And I think that it's very responsive. Local control is very responsive. We can tweak things rather rapidly, much more rapidly than we would with state or federal control. Staff on our local control program live here. Some born and raised here. They know what you're talking about. If you call up and say, I'm having a problem, they know what you're talking about. Rulemaking, it's going to take 30 days or less. That's my guess on, tweaking rules. You know how the ordinance process works for the Borough Assembly. The enforcement, it's kind of a knock, 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 conversation from your neighbor. If that doesn't seem to work and there's more problems, then you're going to get a personal phone call from the mayor. And if that doesn't seem to fix the problem, then there's a possibility of a fine, $500 to $1,000 fine. This year, as far as I know, for this past winter burning season, there were 212 warning letters and 2 citations.
In terms of a fine?
Yep, 2 fines.
Jimmy, does that still start over every year? Does the rotation of the warning letters and fines, does it start new every year?
That's a good question. I don't know. Anybody know?
It does not. No.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
A couple of times you said, if we don't make attainment. Do you mean if, or do you mean when?
Well, why don't I get through, maybe.
That's the fines paid?
I'm sorry?
Were the fines paid?
That's a good question, too. I don't know.
And are you allowed 2 citations or something like that?
What was the question?
Yeah, you're allowed 2 2 citations.
Before you go to court, you get 2 citations.
And the last point, just want to make, again, with the Air Pollution Control Commission, on some rules, you can request a variance. Basically, you can request a get out of jail free card, sort of to speak. So, and that's a jury of your peers, the Air Pollution Control Commission. Great folks, and you know, watch their meeting, their variance request hearings in March and April, and I applaud them. We should all applaud them for the job that they're doing. It's tough to sit in that box and hear those testimonies. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the serious SIP because I think Neil or Mr. Zarnicki was here recently, talked about the recent serious implementation plan and the state's proposal. I can breeze through these slides real quick, but the plan, the updated plan, a more serious plan, was due to EPA last December. That's not going to happen. It'll probably be December. You all probably heard about the ideas that DEC threw out to the community here recently. Comments are due May 23rd on those. They're hoping to have a final public draft comment in the fall with a final submission. They said December 2018, so I just said early 2019. I know the trend. And it's important to remember that the plan must be enforceable. So we can't, you know, throw a bunch of ideas out there that clearly we can't demonstrate that we can enforce those. So it's EPA stresses that a lot, and DEC, that these must be enforceable ideas. So just real quick, these are the fancy terms called the best available control measures, but these are basically the things that would not be applicable that the state's proposing to apply to area-wide sources, so us, not the stationary sources. So these are some ideas that were tossed out at this meeting in April for DEC, that here are some things we've looked at. We had to go out and look around the country and see what has been tried elsewhere. And these are some of the things that might make sense, might not. But what do you think? So they just threw those out. So ultra-low sulfur heating oil, possible registration of all solid fuel burning appliances, no solid fuel burning appliances in new construction, inspection warrants, requiring alternative heating for rental units, maybe only allowing no other alternative source of heating buildings to burn during curtailment, maybe removal of coal-fired solid fuel burning appliances, maybe removal of all hydronic heaters. So those are some of the ideas they came back with. So the headline news, of course, were what are the possible best available control technologies for the stationary sources. So we've got some ideas here. GVA spending $30 million for burning ultra-low sulfur diesel at 2 of their plants. Dry sorbent injection, Aurora, Fort Wainwright, UAF. And then there's, okay, well, maybe if that's not good enough, maybe we want to talk about that. Spray dried absorbers. Don't ask me to explain how those work, but so another mitigation, $103 million. And then the scariest scenario is $160 million. But I think what we heard most about was the ultra-low sulfur diesel option too, and then the dry sorbent injection. Yeah.
Do you know if that UAF is the new plant or the old plant or both?
I don't know. I assume the new, but I don't know. Anybody?
Well, they're both going to be operating, I believe.
That's what I wondered. They didn't
Probably
know.
applying to the old.
Well, the old one's only gonna operate in backup mode.
Yeah, but it'd be required.
It applies to the new.
Applies to the new? Thank you. I told you I'm not the expert. Yep.
There's a dimension of this that really ought to be pointed out, like how much of that particular approach is the real problem. I mean, you're spending 5% of the
Hundreds.
problem.
Right, and
That's an important characterization of it. That's sort of like, it really isn't a problem, that. And, you know, and you're spending vast amounts of money for that and not being able to solve the problem. That's a pretty important thing to realize.
Yep. So, good point, and I didn't put some slides in here that goes into speciation and all that, but I would just say that it's roughly 10%,
At the most, yeah.
and the residential area-wide sources is more 50 to 80, 50, 70%, depends on where you're at.
Yeah, I had a question. You know, you brought up a good point there. You know, if we do all that, we're not gonna get down to PM 2.5. And, they say the biggest problem is wood. And of course, that's a problem for a lot of people, you know, that depend on wood burning, but, you know, there is a need to try to attain that PM 2.5. There's no easy solution, but, you know, have you had a chance to study on a lot of these cleaner burning wood stoves? If they were all installed, would that take care of the problem, or what?
Yeah, well, I guess I could say a couple things about that. Owner of the Woodway, I've had conversations with Mr. Severin, and he has said that just based on his experience, just because you have a stove rated at a certain amount does not mean that you operate the stove at that amount, and it could not actually, you could be actually emitting much more pollution than what the stove is rated at. So there's that. And then there was some work done at the university that I believe suggested that it would be hard to model attainment by not by burning wood, but there are a bunch of assumptions that go into these models, and I don't know the assumptions on, you know, what kind of stoves. So I don't know. I don't know that if anybody tells you they absolutely know, I think they're probably not telling the truth.
If Ken says the stove might not operate properly, even though it's certified, is that because of the person running the
I'm
stove?
sorry, yeah, operator error or moisture content of the wood.
Well, that's part of the choice that the operator has.
Just how much longer do you have to get to the end of your presentation before we start debating all this?
Yeah, not long.
Let's do that, please.
You know, John Davies brought up a point on these, we called it static deal you put down in the chimney there, and that is supposed to pull, you know, out the PM 2.5. You know, that might be one possible solution.
Yep.
I think that could go a long ways.
Yeah. Yep. We've got some preliminary findings on that we could talk about later. So yeah, I'll look through this. So federal rules, if the deadline's missed, or if the SIP is deemed inadequate, the feds have the choice of developing their own plan. The federal government would develop their own plan with their own enforcement, and I write in here in parentheses, targets business sector. That's my understanding. They would require a 5% reduction of PM 2.5 and the precursors every year. And then sanctions would come in, clock would start ticking, there'd be an 18-month and a 24-month clock. And a couple different tools there, the federal highway dollars, using those, and then the 2-to-1 emissions offset, and I've got slides kind of drill down into those. And what I've learned about this is that, so there are these two tools, and there's an 18-month clock and 24-month clock. And somebody or some bodies decide which comes first. Is it the highway transportation funding precision, or is it the 2-to-1 offset? So I've been told that it's actually, it can go back and forth. It's not, it's the 2-to-1 sanctions, 2-to-1 offset, and then highway transportation dollars. So here's what the 2-to-1 offset scenario kind of would look like, though, if like Acme Paving has a current operation, they're emitting so many tons per year, or 100,000 pounds per year, and they want to expand their emissions, their plant, they'd have to offset those anticipated emissions by 2-to-1. And then transportation scenario, so federal funds frozen by the Federal Highway Administration for any highway transportation projects within the non-attainment area, excluding the federal dollars we get for the stove changeout program and any safety improvement projects. So what does that look like? I got curious and talked to folks at DOT and FMATS, and let's just say that we had sanctions over the FY 2021 era. You're looking at $37 million probably. That's been the average over the past 3 years, or the upcoming 3 years, $37 million per year spending. So these are the projects that would be at risk in that time frame if the sanctions, anyway, this is just kind of giving you an idea what this would actually look like for the community. So some of you probably drive on some of these streets every day, cross bridges, walk your dog on a trail, whatever it might be. So real quick, I'm not an economist, but I can talk a little bit about economic effects. I'm going to start with medical expenses and just say that there's a reason that you don't hear these facts a lot, is because they're really, really hard to nail down. The expenses vary by the ailment, they vary by where you're going, and it's really hard to try to put a number on the medical economic effects. There was a study published in the European Science Journal, looked at PM 2.5, a couple cities in California that had high PM 2.5, where they had a number of children with asthma, and they looked at the direct and indirect costs for that family for a year, and it was about $4,000 per year for a family that has a child with asthma. Roughly, I don't know, I mean, some of you probably know better than I, but you know, what we spend in Alaska on healthcare is roughly double what they spend in California. There was a statewide report, 2001, said that one hospitalization for asthma in the state cost $9,200. That was in 2001. So there's lots of different numbers out there, and the point is, like, it's easy to say, you know, this is what heating oil costs, and this is what it cost yesterday, and this is what it cost, you know, last year. It's hard to talk about medical costs. But just for, you know, so at $2.65 a gallon heating oil, AFHC's average consumption of needs in an average home, 188 million BTUs. So for heating oil for average home, at that number, it'd be like $3,300 a year that you'd be spending on heating oil.
That's not ultra low.
Right.
Sulfur.
That'd be 40 cents more a gallon, roughly.
That's the child with asthma.
And if you buy split dry birch, I did a week ago, did a Google search, and I could have some delivered to my house for, you know, it turns out it's come out to about $2,600 a year. Of course, there are people that cut their own wood, like I did like my dad made me do all those years. my dad has his sons cutting his wood for him now. So long-term economic effects, you know, there are costs associated, long-term health costs associated with PM 2.5. And again, it's you can find different numbers. We do know that we've spent $10 million or more on the air quality program in the borough, and that some of that's federal money for the stove changeout program. But there's monitoring, there's sniffer folks, there's education, website, just on and on. I don't know the number, but I know DEC spends a lot of money on this program for Fairbanks. They operate all the monitors. One monitor costs almost $200,000 a year just to maintain and operate. So we can get into some of the SIP ideas. So you've seen those numbers already. So there's this mandatory switch to ultra-low sulfur diesel, roughly 40 cents more a gallon, based upon an estimate and the work done by the University of Alaska Fairbanks. The industry upgrade numbers, the offset numbers, and the transportation funds. So in summary, just I hope that I've demonstrated through this history, kind of walking back through time, that we're facing a problem that's not unique to us. Many of our ancestors have faced this problem in the past, but we're not really wired well to respond to something that's invisible, that you can't see. We're wired really well to respond to terrorist attacks, things like that. We'll mobilize immediately, but this hidden danger, we're just not wired well to address it. The solutions, education is huge. The stove changeout program, I'm sure, has helped. I think the ESP devices will make a tremendous impact. There are technical solutions, but there are behavioral solutions too. And some of the behavioral is to get the technical solutions adopted, you've got to go through this behavioral experimentation, which requires developing trust, relationships. It's slow. You can't go fast. It's frustrating. But that's what we need to do, and I think that we're best suited to do that. And again, I think that the control program that we have going here, I'd much rather see my neighborhood developing this control program than people in Washington or in Juneau. Nothing against those folks. They're just folks like you and I, but I'd rather not. I just want to read one last thing. We've got quite a bit of time yet for questions. Hank Bartos, that name ring a bell? So he introduced a resolution in 2003, 15 years ago, and he dredged up a lot of history in this community's dealing with air pollution. And he put some of the language in his resolution. I just want to share a few with you. So he harkens back to 1978, U.S. EPA and Alaska Governor Jay Hammond accepted Mayor Carlson's offer for the borough to be the lead organization for developing and implementing a plan for achieving the air quality standards in the borough. He talks about Resolution 7329, so I would assume that'd be 1973, affirming that the air quality problems of the borough can best be managed at the local level with fiscal support from the state and federal levels. Of course, love that fiscal support. He quotes from Ordinance 9620-10. Quote, a majority of the public commenting to the Assembly have expressed their preference for the borough to continue operation of the air quality monitoring and IM program rather than the program being operated under the responsibility of the state DEC. And then he refers to this independent audit that was done of 55 I&M programs in 33 states. And our program was rated one of the top programs out of all 55 programs. And the auditor said that the borough's staff are, quote, markedly superior in their knowledge, experience, and how they deal on a daily basis with the public and the I&M industry and to those other programs. And they're considered to be the most competent group of I&M program personnel the auditor has observed to date. So here we are. We got, for the seventh time, we got this ballot question before us. And I mean, something has changed in the nation, and it's happened here too. And for some reason, we don't want to take ownership of this issue. And it doesn't mean that we want to take ownership of all rules and no education, but like this community said, we want ownership of this problem. And I hope that we'll continue to do that on this problem now and today. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're sort of between a rock and a hard spot. You know, our climatic conditions are a lot different than elsewhere. And, you know, we've been working at this to try to come up with a solution for God knows how many years. And, you know, there's possible solutions there. If we get LNG and the people convert over, will we still be able to meet the PM 2.5? That's one question that I have. You know, we're all hoping that the gas line gets built and that we will get gas at a price it's affordable. But you know, it's tough. It's tough living up here. We're not getting pipeline wages like we got before, and there's some bright spots on the horizon as far as the state deriving more revenues from oil production. You know, that will help the budgets of the state. But, you know, we've been beating our head against the wall trying to come up with a solution, and I'd sure like to see a solution like probably everybody else in this room would like too.
Mike, what do you got?
Well, there's a good bet, I would say, that if we can convince people to burn dry wood, purchase a newer stove, and install these electrostatic precipitators, that we would get into measured containment. There's technical and regulatory containment, and then there's reality. But anyway, I think there's a good bet that could happen based on the speciation studies and et cetera, and what somebody claims to be the components of PM 2.5. The problem has been communications. Just the fact that we've had 7 initiatives in 10 years means we're not getting good buy-in. And the folks that I've been talking to, a lot of them, that are burning wood, they're resistant to the government telling them to do anything. You know, I understand that. And those are the folks we have to address and convince. And that's not going to work by a dictated process. And it's not going to work by forcing people to change over to gas, forcing people to change over to oil. We're going to have, we have had too many problems doing that. On the other hand, I don't know, 10 years ago or whenever this started out, when it was first brought out that the wet wood versus dry wood, people had just started using a lot more wood stoves because the price of oil had gone up. What was his name? Connors speculated that at that point, and the goal was 65 parts per million then, that if we just switched from wet wood to dry wood, we probably would come into compliance. And so we did get a meeting together of the woodcutters and the people that were interested in clean air, and away we were going. We started. And then ordinances started coming out. And then because of the ordinance, seriously, people go back to fighting and then, instead of working on the solution. So I think we really do need to kind of ignore the ordinance and the big fight over whether to maintain local control or give it back up, and start working on I mean, while economic and voluntary measures of getting people involved with the solution. And have had, you know, a start on that again. Jeannie's effort with the electrostatic precipitators, that looks really the most promising. I think they're gonna help whether you're burning wet wood or dry wood. The problem with that is the EPA does not have the test method approved. It's based, apparently they're using these in Europe with some success, and if you move over to Switzerland, you could use an ESD, but if you live in Fairbanks, you can't. We met with Senator Sullivan Saturday to try and get some work from his end, talking to the EPA to just get them to, if you will, allow us to try that. Hard to say whether that's going to happen, but we're going down that road. I think there's a lot of arguments that could be made that if we started talking to the DEC and the EPA, I think we can get some sort of leniency on that they will allow us to try it. And if we're allowed to try it, I think there's a possibility of raising some revenue locally and getting this off the ground if we really get lucky, maybe even this year. And we are coming down in the North Pole area, which is the most out of compliance monitor at this time, but we're coming down at a fairly steep clip. It's still, I forget, 80-ish, is that where it is at? But that was 2016, so we don't have last year's results. So anyway, if we come into monitored compliance, we make that regulatory monitor happy out in that area. Then if we can get them to buy time, we can avoid these other more stringent measures. And I think it would take a lot of work to do that, but I do think that it is possible if we work at it from that angle, and if we get people thinking, you know, this is possible to solve, and let's work on it together. I think that the initiative would take care of itself. So that's my recommendation.
Thanks, Mike. Mike, I understand the aspect of having the U.S. Senate senators speak to EPA, that process. When I went to the head office in Washington, D.C. of EPA, they had their attorneys there, and I was asking for waivers to this because we're, for whatever reason, should have some leniency. They said that they're required under the Clean Air Act to do X, Y, and Z, so they need to amend the law. They being senators and representatives,
right?
Federal, those bodies, and that hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened since it was amended to remove aspects of it. So, I'd like to say I appreciate what Senator Sullivan thinks on that, but I'd be really surprised. But it's possible with, leaning, on, budgets and things like that it could happen. But it certainly didn't go very far, and I understand when I spoke with Mayor Castle in his recent meetings, that didn't go well either for the same idea of leniency, waivers. So.
And that could very well be. And two things on that: we have the no ash variant. Maybe, I don't know. I don't have the arithmetic. I don't have the model, but apparently there's about 100 stoves out in the North Pole area that have the no ash waiver. And those stoves are going to be burning regardless. And if we could just, my goal this year is get those precipitators on those stoves, forget everything else, and see if it works. And the EPA has bought off on the waivers. So it would seem difficult to make that go backwards. And then the other in that area, the greenwood versus drywood. What's his name? Wood Brothers, Mike Clemens, has done an incredible job of building up a wood selling business. He's now, or was, selling about 2,000 cords a year of wood out of that shop. And his perspective is, he's having a hard time getting people to come in today, if you will, and from now until the 1st of June, buy whatever wood he's got, which is, some of it's dry cut, fire burn wood, and some of it's green. But if they buy green wood now, stack it and store it properly, it's usable by the fall. The trouble is how to get people focused this time of year on getting their wood in, and that's gonna take some effort.
Okay, well, you had something?
I just had a sort of question regarding the $4 million that we just got from Borough, just received from EPA, and my understanding, and it was just basically listening to radio story on it, but there's still money left over from the $2.5 million for the change-out program, but this is not specifically for it's not necessarily just a change-out, but there's a lot of other components to it to get people to shift away from wood burning. And can somebody speak to the details of what is in that $4 million and what it would provide for the borough?
That was, EPA money.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
EPA money to the borough.
It's just, basically, I heard it too, and I think the intent is to discourage a replacement with a new wood burning device, solid fuel burn, so they're trying to incentivize an alternative heating appliance rather than solid fuel.
Right, which would be more like oil and
Propane, natural gas.
and the, theoretical gas, whatever, yeah. Okay. Jimmy, I wanted to thank you for your presentation and the measured work you've done to make a balanced presentation. My thoughts always return to, I must have a stamp on my forehead or something that says, "Sin Patrice, your story." There's a human story behind every single one of the complaints. And for instance, at Wood River, when they said there was 187 complaints, I know personally that 6 times the whole school sent in a complaint and asked to be considered as 500 complaints. 4 of the teachers who were teaching there now suffer pulmonary emboli. 2 have had strokes, and they're not even 50 yet. Now, can we directly relate that? No. But I hope that on the task force you talked about, that there will be medical community involved, that there be as many people talking about the medical aspects of the problems as we have talking about the economic, because really the medical is economic. I mean, you don't have to go any further than me. My bill was $1.3 million, and you've heard that story, many of you. So directly related to an experience with smoke, my child. So I really appreciate what Mike's doing. I hope we can work together, because I agree with what you're saying about education and everything else, that you can't ignore the problem, and I think this is a really good way not to be ignoring it. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
I'd just like to put some focus on, I agree with what Mike said, and I agree that it's a partial, at least, maybe substantial part of the solution, like these electrostatic precipitators. We kind of have an idea of how they work, kind of have an idea what they cost. How available is there some kind of money that can be helpful? How can we manage to get the most problematic producers to get this solution? I mean, there was some discussion about some of the meetings we've had about discussing this, where people said, look, if we had an affordable option, you showed a comparison there with wood costs versus oil, and the difference is about $1,000. And that's about what the electrostatic precipitator would cost, ironically and conveniently, actually. So for that differential 1 year, some small operating costs, you might be able to make a substantial imprint. How can we get that financial position in place so that the transition could be easily made? That's what I think is a big part of this problem. And it could be done quickly if we had available money.
I've been talking to Golden Valley and Usabelli, the Lung Association, and there's some interest. Nobody's written a check yet, of course, but there is some interest in getting non-governmental money. And for instance, Golden Valley has a financial risk in this, in the millions. And
They do.
and they realize that. But the hang up there with, with both Golden Valley and usability is that they have to have some assurance, as much as you can get, that this is money well spent, not spend $500,000 now and then spend your another $50 million later. But there is interest in that. And I talked to a few of the churches in the North Pole area, and they're interested in helping getting the word out, et cetera. I'm gonna call back, but I gotta get back to them, the Boy Scouts and other organizations, make this a competition, have a lot of fun doing it. And get the word out from the bottom up, not the top down. And from talking to some of the folks in that area around the First Boston Road area, if I go out and talk to them, or when I have gone out and talked to them, I get a better response than when somebody from the borough goes out and talks to them. And if somebody closer to them than me went out and talked to them, or, whatever, you can get a conversation going. And it might take a couple of times going back and forth, but we are getting some conversation going out in that area. And now time is going to be a crunch to get this done this year. Jeannie, have you heard any more back from the precipitator folks as far as deadlines?
I'm just really discouraged. It's not the precipitator folks, it's the local folks.
Local folks, yes.
And then I've tried and tried and tried. It's not my job. I'm just very discouraged. The country of Switzerland is willing to put some money in. That was, the borough was told that 4 months ago. That offer was out there. Switzerland gets it. It's an economic development incentive for them to produce a lot of these systems in America. There's an expert there that's an American that works at one of the universities that did all the protocol and the testing for the ESPs to be approved in Switzerland. And he's waiting for a call from the borough so that he can help them advise to get the EPA certification on a fast track to get it done by fall. And he still hasn't gotten a call. We've put people in touch, and it just isn't happening. And I did a public records request, and it got me back. And it's just so frustrating. I'm just this little peon.
Well,
and it's frustrating.
I can say that they just as
Mike, let's get Mike here.
I'll be very brief. You mentioned Golden Valley is gonna have to upgrade their facilities. I should remind everybody here that that is us.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of these millions and hundreds of millions of dollars get added up, but that's what we pay. Golden Valley doesn't assume that, but we're a co-op.
Yep.
We're the consumers. We're paying for this upgrade if we have to do it.
Yeah.
It looks likely that we're gonna have to do that if we can't get everyone on board. So this is a community problem.
Right.
I don't know anyone in here that doesn't pay an electric bill, and you want to see it really go up, just keep burning wood the way we are.
Yeah. And when I have mentioned that to some of these folks that tell the people to go suck eggs, the alternative here is
They're not
you
saving
pay
money.
through your electricity bill, and they go, oh, yeah.
Let's get the rest of these questions answered.
The mayor wants to, the mayor, I was just pointing
I
to
just
the
want
mayor.
to piggyback. I just want you guys all to know that Jean and the Swiss government has invited her to come to present on the Arctic science, her initiative on the ESP. I mean, that's how much they're interested in what happened with this experiment from citizen science, and that I think that they wouldn't do that if they didn't have a lot of respect for her and confidence in her research.
Mike, has there been any discussion from your point of view with the Interior delegation on, it's gonna be kind of in legislators' laps about, oh my God, here all, cost of utilities are could be going up soon.
Yeah, you know, to be honest, I haven't even talked to them. They're busy and
Well,
I wanted to move on, but
yeah, they spend a lot of time with that.
yeah. But, I don't know, well, I'm sure they would agree with me, but I don't know that they can do a whole lot. The hang up seems to be getting the sense from EPA that, they would go along with it to, kind of in a nutshell, my perspective is they are trying to prove what works, then try it, as opposed to try it and see what works. And I don't know, talking to regulators, as you experienced, is difficult, because they have to go by the prescriptive regulations that they have, and you know, I agree with them that they have to do that, but there has to be some way to, and there is, because all of the measures that were brought up there were tried first somewhere.
Yeah.
And we could use that argument.
Yeah, it's that appropriation piece that if we, you know, have a cost in 4 months, you know, it could be an appropriation. I know this isn't the best point in life for an appropriation, but this is pretty serious stuff with raising, you know, the cost of energy again in Fairbanks.
From either the state or the feds, you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned the interior delegation, you know, that in the past they've been able to perform.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, I don't know about a bunch about the ESPs. Excuse me. What I do know is there's an interior energy project that's currently underway, and it's part of the solution to affordable energy and to cleaner air. And I think that a lot of this talk is driven away from the education portion of subscribing to that system rather than a known clean system, rather than experimental things. And not to, you know, I don't know anything really about the ESPs, and I don't know comparatively if they're as clean as natural gas or not, but we know where natural gas is going to lead us. And I think we should focus our energies on educating the public on hooking to that system and, you know, throw good dollars at good rather than good dollars at possibly bad.
I would say it's not experimental. It's experimental in America, but
Yeah.
electricity works in America just like it works in Europe and Australia.
Again, I don't know anything about it, but
Yeah.
I would beg the question of whether it's as clean as natural gas or not.
When you put it on a pellet stove, it is as clean as natural gas.
Yeah.
If you put it on a wood stove, it's as clean as a pellet stove.
Yeah.
In my test.
And Jimmy, did you want to talk at your own presentations? Did you kind of raise your hand?
Yeah, I threw a couple of slides in here that I've heard this come up a few times, and I just, as I've learned, I just want to share what I've learned. That so these spots on this graph, they represent a 3-year average. So it's the year in the previous 2 years, okay? So you got North Pole in the black, and then you've got the Fairbanks monitor down here in blue. So that's not just that year. So it's a 3-year average. It's the 8th worst day of that year, the 8th worst day of the previous 2 years. So, but that doesn't tell the whole story, right? So I wanted to share a couple other things. So the DEC's draft, one of their Backham plans, it's on their website. They talked about it in April. They show the trend of heating oil prices. So you see the heating oil prices have also trended downward. And then I got curious about heating degree days. And so I made a map here that shows the heating degree days over the 10-year period. And you can see that the trend is downward for heating degree days. So I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but it's like those numbers, they're going down. That's great. But why are they going down? And so you start kind of teasing that out, and it's not as crystal clear. Like, well, yeah, you know, what we're doing now is working. Like, well, maybe not. But anyway, I just wanted to share those with you. So thank you.
Well, just a comparative though, one of the problems here is time. You might wait for natural gas, but in the meantime, you lose your highway funds.
Yeah.
I mean, this problem has to be solved, and it has to be solved in short order. I don't think the solution is natural gas for that reason. It's not gonna happen in 2 years. So, yeah, we've got to solve this problem as a community.
Mhm.
And you know what, we can do this.
Oh, yeah.
We're just not stubborn. We just get to it. There's options out here. We could find the money.
Mhm.
Just get our act together here.
And we're looking
Show
at
what
about,
we're made of.
we're looking at about, give or take, $250,000 to buy 100 of these and do the promotion and this and that to get them installed. And that's a big check for any one person to write, but divide that up a little bit and that's a little more doable.
Jean had to go out for surgeries, but, along what Mike just said, if those devices are able to be obtained and paid for and put into an experimental section, when we thought maybe the no ash waiver homes, in the North Pole area, in our discussions, correct me if I'm wrong here, Mike, and that, CCHRC, we've had serious conversations and they're very willing to carry on that research. And we're in meetings with them now. I'm talking with Robin and Bruno over there at CCHRC. So it is,
Of course they can.
to your point, we can move forward.
They can't do it without money though, so that.
Right, I mean,
Right.
so
Yeah,
that's to
And
Mike's
that
point.
research part,
Yeah,
that's
But
yeah.
on
pieces
top
are
of
falling
that, yeah.
together.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think we should do that. Actually, I would just say, I'm disappointed that Jeannie is so upset about the borough, because when I've talked to the mayor and Nick and other folks, they're quite high on the on the electrostatic precipitator idea. And they really believe that that's a place we need to go. When I've talked to assembly members, they're excited about that possibility. So I don't know, there's a disconnect in the conversation here somewhere, but I think that virtually everybody I've talked to in this community want to see a bunch of those get installed yesterday. Yeah, and so there are some issues about, getting EPA to certify it so we can actually have a program that we can, so that, and I think we should do that, because I think that if we follow that model, we can have economic development here where people are building the devices and incorporating the electronics and from Switzerland. And so it appears to me that whether or not it totally solves the problem is another question. I'm not saying it will entirely, but I from what I know, I think it can. It's got to help a lot. It's got to make a big difference. And so I really think that we need to, hope we, as best we can, stop shooting each other and start working on that.
That's the biggest part of it.
Catherine?
Sorry.
I just would say that I think that suggesting putting ESPs on no ash seems to address EPA's issues, in my humble opinion. You've got people that are already going to be burning, so we're not making it worse. We have the potential of making it better and testing. So I think that's a really strong argument and a good idea to pursue. I've asked the question. I don't know if the $4 million grant would cover that. I have an inquiry in. I'll let you know when I hear it. But I think that really does address that particular.
And I'd like to say one more thing, if I could. Just Catherine and I saw this problem of the big power plants, coming 3 years ago or something. We went back and talked to our congressional delegation then and said, it's clear that, I don't know what the number is exactly, but those plants contribute maybe 10% of the problem at most, probably less than that in my opinion, but that's the order of magnitude certainly. And so to spend 2 orders of magnitude more money on a problem that's 10% of the problem makes no sense at all. It's just crazy. And so what we pitched, we went back to the Congress and said, can't you somehow get a waiver process so that the EPA can allow those plants to spend, instead of spending $100 million, they could spend $1 million, and they put it into the program, right? And you give them a 5-year deferment on any of this serious SIP problem or some solution like that. And I still think that we need to be pushing on the congressional delegation to do that. I don't see, especially in the current administration, where they don't seem to be too concerned about what the law is. You know, I think that they could push, you know, that our congressional delegation, working with the Trump administration, could push a temporary waiver process at EPA that would allow something like that to work. And it would just make so much sense for this community.
And
So one of the things
I
that
hope people
to
work.
make
continue to
this
have that
happen, you've
conversation.
got to come up with a community opinion.
Yeah.
You know, you can't run to your legislator and expect him or her to, you know, step outside of the box and ask a national administration to do something different for this community that you don't have community buy-in on that. So, you know, I think this idea of a community working group to come up with a community solution, a good one, you know, maybe it'll have components of what everybody talks about, you know, maybe not, but, you know, I would encourage you to, so what this working group is looking for is representatives from groups and interested people. I know they're trying to keep it, you know, 30-40, so, you know, there's a lot of people right here that are interested in it, obviously, so. And it's a big issue. I'm not convinced that we're going to be able to solve this problem without regulation, because, you know, I read the paper, I listen to the news, you know. There was a guy on the news the other day that said, you know, the borough hasn't found me yet. I hope they never find me, you know. I don't know if he's not paying taxes or what, you know, but there's, you know, we live in a community. The reason people live in communities is because there's an opportunity to work, send their kids to school, go to libraries, you know, go to Mary Siah, whatever they want to do. But at the end of the day, you know, the good thing about Alaska is we have places you can move to, and you don't have to answer those. You don't have to pay those taxes. You don't have to, you know, you don't have to. So, you know, but who you look at, no jobs.
So, earlier when we were struggling to have one of the years of monitoring allow us for all the monitors to be within the level, and therefore we would have reset the clock to another 9 years, I believe. That's when I brought forward the ordinance about paying people, buying people fuel oil on days, or paying for their fuel oil on days when we anticipated poor air quality. With these electronic precipitators, the borough could be doing something like that again. If we had, and this is what I forget lots of things at this point, but if we had 1 year where we had no exceedances because we modified the way we heat our homes, what would that do to this clock that's going along? We may have missed the opportunity, but still having a record year of nothing, I don't mean nothing, but no exceedances in that average system. And what I don't understand is that ordinance was brought to the assembly, and the assembly said, hell no.
Too expensive.
Yeah.
But it wasn't for 1 year, John, it wasn't. The argument was, well, it's not sustainable over years, but it would reset the clock. But what about now with the assembly coming forward with that money to purchase these things, to get things rolling for this coming year, even though we may not be able to make it at this point? Has the assembly just brought an ordinance, drafting an ordinance about funding?
That would be a Catherine question.
I'm not aware of one.
don't
It
get it.
seems like there's been conversations that, of course, you know, we have open meetings act, so I think there may be a few people working on it. But I'm not one of those three, is what I can say.
Okay, well, let's try to wrap up here. Patricia, you have something?
Well, I was just gonna say that, to the point made about interior gas utility, and we're moving forward trying to find out what's best for the community, but it isn't gonna be happening before, Joe will correct me if I'm wrong, 2020, 2021. At this point, unless we do something different to speed up conversions and connections. It is true that in the Cardinal report, they never, ever, measured any wood burners, converting to gas. They didn't even do that study because they assumed no wood burners would convert to gas. So I don't know where that all fits in, but I thought I would throw that out there because, I think it's significant in the end. when we measure our final product.
Well, Jimmy, you obviously touched on a very,
Fan the flame,
a very hot subject, a very
Yeah.
tender subject, and one that needs to be addressed. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate you coming out, talking on issues. And thank the rest of you. Again, I encourage you to, to think about this working group and participate. I think that, there's gonna be some money put to this program, from the point source emitters and others. We have hired Brian Rogers to moderate it, and, I think if we could come up with something that we collectively want to do as a community to move forward, the history that Jimmy put up there, it's obvious that proactive response to this issue is needed by this community. So, that's us. Let's do it.
It's too late to make a comment.
About what?
About a two-pronged approach. There's no doubt that we need a better air quality. But alleviating the 2.5 does not mean that we will alleviate the cost of fuel. And the cost of fuel is part of the problem of development in this area. But without either one, you're still going to be stuck. So you can't depend on the lateness or the tardiness of IGU or of the big line to come through and make an excuse for that without doing this other, without trying to at least approach more clean air, because it's going to require both for the development of this country.
And I'll tell you, it's my feet sticking out of that testo on top of Gene's roof with that research. Citizen Science started that research. It's our third successful project, and Gene headed that up, and I'm telling you that we're doing everything we can to make that work. So just because I'm kind of wearing two different hats here, yeah. Okay, enough said.
I'd like to respond to Dr. Fate here just for a moment. Another alternative is just quit using so much energy. Insulation is your friend.
That's easy to say, but when it gets 50 below zero in this country, and this is a cold country, when it gets cold, people don't think about.
That's where insulation is your friend.
People have already
Build your
built.
house and
People don't have the money. People don't have the money to re-insulate.
Where are your building codes?
What?
Where are your building?
Actually, the city has a building.
We have a lot of people.
Your weatherization will retrofit your house
Pardon me?
if you're below the median income level.
Okay.
Interior weatherization will insulate your house for free.
Huh?
Say 30% if you're in.
Well, if everything was free, everybody would be doing it.
Well, it's interior weatherization, it's federal.
Well, you're partially right, Mike, but everybody isn't gonna do it because they either don't have the money or the inclination.
People
Just that simple.
no matter what.
But it's getting it out,
have to show
get the message out.
Still have to show.
I have more of those invites, I think the invites to our open house.
Are gonna go on.
Okay.
Well, I don't know whether I should go home or,
Yeah, I have to figure that out.
Julie came in town,
Oh, she did.
gonna go see her mom and spend some time with her.
Good.
Yeah. The immediate thing, and I think that we just did this talking.
Yeah, we, all these
To get these precipitators.
ideas